Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Luna and you're watching my channel Tierra y Luna. And today I'm going to be taking you through a step-by-step tutorial on how to do this painting right here of these Christmas ornaments. So let's get right into it. So to start off, I just have some splashes of a jewel-toned green placed down in the background. And as you can see now, I'm adding some more yellowy green. And this is going to build the base of the illusion of my Christmas tree in the background. Making sure to keep a lot of white spaces between where I'm placing my colors because I want to also give the illusion of snow on the top of the Christmas tree. Thinking about placing my coloration down, I'm thinking of a very triangular shape with the point at the top, like once again to simulate that Christmas tree shape. The spaces that are already wet, I'm now going in with a darker green and dabbing that into those wet areas, and that will feather out the pigment of the paint and create a nice feathering effect. So made sure that when I picked up my color, I also had quite a bit of water to dilute the pigment so that it will create that feathering effect. So I'm just going to go ahead and add this darker color in all around the background here to create that depth. I'm keeping in mind when I'm making my brush strokes to make a down movement and fanning out to mimic the way that the pine needles on the Christmas tree sleigh. So gradually the shape of the Christmas tree becomes more and more clear the more we add in these different effects. Now I'm just going to add in some splatters because I like that style in watercolor paintings, that really splattered paint effect, droplets. It's important to know that when making these droplets, the more water you have on your brush, the bigger the droplets will be, which obviously makes sense. But I wanted to go for really small droplets, so I had just enough water on my paintbrush to make those droplets. And as you can see, even then I didn't have quite enough, but that's okay because I didn't want the droplets right now to get too big. So as the colors and the layers start to dry a little bit, they're going to lighten up. And as they lighten up, I'm seeing how much more I need to darken them. So I'm going to go back in with another darker, deeper, cooler toned green and make those shadows even more apparent. And as I just mentioned, I went in with a cooler toned green. And as you can see on screen here, it's almost a blue. And by almost, I mean it very clearly is very much a blue. But the reason we're making these shadows a bluer shadow is because using cooler tones to darken things also pushes them further back visually, because that's how color theory works. So using the cool tone blue shadows really creates the illusion of more depth. So right next to those really blue shadows, I'm going to add a really yellow but still dark green for my midtones. So now I'm going to start bringing that green closer into the outline of the ornaments and I'm gonna take in consideration where my light source is coming from. And I set this light source for this painting coming from the upper right hand corner. So by having the light come in that way, the shadow would fall on the ornament on the lower left hand corner. And I'm gonna start roughing in these darker edges of the ornaments now, and some of the details on the pine needles and making more angular strokes. And to roughen some of those details on the pine needles, I'm making sure I'm making those angular thin brush strokes right on the lower edges of where I've made and laid down the green. So now I'm adding in a more yellow, lighter green to bring some of the pine needles forward and add some highlight. And as you can see, when I add the paint to areas that are already wet and saturated with water, the paint really just spreads out and brings itself further into that water puddle. And I could play around with the details of this background forever and ever. Just play around with it until it feels right for you. So now I'm just going to go in with the first wash of color for each of the ornaments, and I'm going to pick an ornament that is near the driest part of the background so that I don't have any accidental color runoff into areas that I did not mean to put that color in. So to get a nice flat even wash of color on an object, you want to make sure that you have just the right amount of water, so not too much but not too little. And even here I had just a little bit too much, but that's okay. I just went in, added the color, and then I dried my brush really well before I went in and picked up some more of that water and dried it off to get a better, flatter, even wash of color. And because I want a nice soft gradient transition from the darker part of the ornament to the lighter part of the ornament, I'm going to go in with more pigment while the wash is still wet. So you can see me dropping that paint in here, and it'll dry really smoothly. Like, it'll transition from the dark part to the light part really nicely. And because we're painting an object that's a sphere, and like I mentioned earlier, we're keeping in mind our light source and where that is coming from. And like I also mentioned earlier, my light source is coming from the upper right-hand corner. So that's where I'm going to drop in my highlight. And as you can see, I turn my paper so I can get the best angle, and I slowly drag the paint from the edge of where my pencil mark is. I move that pigment over to bring more of that pigment towards the darker part of the ornament and remove that pigment from where I want my highlight to be. So now I'm just going to repeat the process on the ornament right next to it because the background has dried a little bit more, and this one should also be safe to not cause any accidental bleeding. And I want this ornament to have a little bit more of a golden sheen to it. So my first layer is going to be more orange than red. So I'm going to pick up some yellow and orange up my color here. And I'm going to add a big drop of yellow onto my ornament. And I will say I had a little bit too much water than I wanted, but once again, that's okay. We can fix it. I added that yellow to the upper right-hand area of the ornament. Again, that is where the light is hitting it. And because warmer tones bring things forward and all of that jazz, is going to give a shiny effect to the ornament. Also, I go ahead and dry my brush off before I go back in and move my pigment around to lay it in the places that I want it to be. And to dry my brush, instead of wasting all that paint and pigment that I have on my brush, and because I know it's all yellow and I want to have a mostly yellow ornament, I go ahead and lay that pigment and wash down on this ornament that you're seeing right, and I'm just bringing that pigment down and moving the bulk of it into the lower left hand corner so that shadow is becoming more apparent. And I'm just going to keep adding pigment to this yellow until I'm happy with how built up and opaque that yellow is. And then I'm just going to take a paper towel and lift some of that pigment to drop in that highlight. And as you can see, even though we're only on our first wash here and first layer of paint, we're still building that 3D effect on the ornaments. And now I'm just going to take that yellow and make some splatters with it to have some continuity. And again, I like that splattery look effect. And it also just looks like blurred and more ornaments scattered throughout the Christmas tree. I'll also point out, like I said earlier, I have a lot more water on my brush now, and you can tell because these splatters are a lot bigger than the original teeny tiny green splatters I made at the beginning of the background. And this is what it's looking like so far. So now I'm just going to let this layer dry completely before I add anything else to the painting. So now that it's dry, I'm going to take a more true cool toned red and drop that into the lower left hand portion of this ornament. And I also want to point out that I switched my brush from a filbert to a round brush. So now this brush that you see here is the round brush, and my brush stroke is slow with quite a bit of pressure. And I went ahead and dried off my brush so that I can go in with a dry brush and move that pigment around and smooth out that transition from the true cool toned red up into the yellow in the highlight area. And I took that same darker true toned red and I dropped that into the shadow area on the other red ornament right next to it. And then I come back to this yellow red ornament and I drop in more yellow once again to get the smoothest transition from the yellow to the red that I possibly can. And I switch back to my filbert brush and use the flatness of it to spread as much pigment as I can down towards that lower left hand area. So my round brush I use to lay pigment in the specific area that I wanted, and my filbert brush is for dragging the pigment to where the precise areas I want it to. So I'm just going to keep building up these shadows and blending the transitions and just keep doing that until I'm happy with the shapes that I have. And off screen, I just added on some red droplets, teeny tiny little ornaments around. And here I am adding in some more teeny tiny little red ornaments. And now I'll just build up more of that shadow on the yellow ornament. And dabbing off some of the pigment to lighten that highlight. And just repeating this process. And rinse and repeat until I'm happy with the way that it looks. And now I'm going to start working on this teal green shiny ornament down here. And to start, I'm going to drop in a very bright yellowy green. And smooth out the edges here. I apply quite a bit of pressure at the beginning and drag my brush and lift the brush off at the end to get that nice, smooth, crisp edge. And now I'm going to pick up a dark bluish green and drop that into the lower left hand part of the ornament to make our shadow. And as I could tell, the warping of the paper was causing the water on this ornament to pool more towards the top of the ornament, and I didn't really want that, so I pick up the paper and tilt it so that gravity can pull that pigment down to the area that I actually want it to be in. And then with a drier brush, I take that watery pigment and bring it down once again to where I want it to be. And because I want a smooth transition from color to color, since it's still wet, I will take my more blue turquoise-y color and drop that into the shadow portion of this ornament. I also took that blue and added it to a couple of ornaments off camera. Didn't intend to have it off camera, but you know, sometimes I'm just painting not in frame. So then I come back to the big ornament and I blend out the blue into the green for a nice smooth gradient. Then I go rinse my brush off, pick up some water along with a little tiny bit of yellowy green paint, and I dab that onto the highlight. And then I just push the pigment around again to make it lay where I want it to, and play with the shape and the highlight just a little bit. And then I go add some of that yellowy green to another teal green ornament. And I'm just going to go ahead and fix the shape of one of the ornaments I accidentally painted off screen. And I just rotate my paper around so that I can get the best angle to smooth out the edges of this ornament. And then I come back to the big ornament down here and play with this a little bit more. And we're at the stage now that it really could be done at any moment, but we're at the phase where you just keep adding details and playing with things until everything looks exactly the way you want it to. I'm lifting some of the pigment on this ornament to give it that highlight and to give it that spherical shape. And here I am just adding a little bit more detail to this big red ornament. To finish off, I'm just going to add a little bit more details to the trees, really fine little short lines, again to indicate the pine trees. And painting Christmas ornaments, I feel like, is a really great beginner painting to do because it's forcing you to learn how to paint 3D spherical objects, and it's just bringing in a lot of great different techniques and brush strokes and color theory, and I just really think this is a really good beginner painting to learn a lot of these basics. And it's a great subject matter to come back to if you haven't painted for quite some time, or if you're midway through your painting journey. It's just a really great way to practice and study, once again, these basic techniques that will make every single one of your paintings shine more if the more that you work on your technical abilities. And here's the finished piece. I hope you enjoyed painting along with me today, and I hope you learned something from this video, and I hope you tune in to my future videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn your notifications on, and thank you for watching!